right now. The Sixers getting ready to take on the Bulls tonight. You can hear that game on 97.3 ESPN or watch it nationally on ESPN with coverage starting at 7. Ryan Rucco, Richard Jefferson, Cassidy Hubbard will provide the commentary. And one guy who covers this team pretty closely, if you watch the NBA in the Northeast, you'll see a lot of reporting from Tim Bontemps, and he is set to join us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as we get you ready for the Sixers and the Bulls. And this Sixers team kind of interesting, Tim. I know you've been around them for a while now. I mean, you've kind of followed this team around through the goods and the bad. And how do you view this team as opposed to some of the teams in the recent past that a lot of people thought were good enough? This team's different, but what makes this team maybe different from the ones of the recent past?
Well, I certainly think that this year's team fits together much better than last year's did. I was one of the people that thought the experiment with Al Horford and Josh Richardson last year was going to work in Philly. Obviously, it did not. And, this team much more closely resembles the group from a couple of years ago when J.J. Redick and Darius Saric and Robert Covington were on the team with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. And that group, really made sense basketball-wise on the court, right? And had a pretty clear theory of how it was trying to play at both ends. Obviously, that team didn't quite have a high enough ceiling to get where it wanted to go, and that led the Sixers down to a path of making a bunch of moves that led to where they are now. But I do think this group makes sense. I'm still not convinced they have quite enough top-end talent to get where they want to go, but they've definitely played really well. Joel Embiid's playing better than he ever has, and, you can at least see a coherent plan for what they're trying to do, which, as you guys know, has not always been the case in recent years.
Yep, they seemingly came up short a lot in the past, and there was, a multitude of reasons why people in the local market, the fans would say, Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid or Brett Brown. There was always somebody, but could it simply have been they were very young, they weren't ready? Do you look at this team now with Ben and Joel as more ready to win than they were in the past?
I mean, I think that's definitely true in that if you just look at the NBA and the course of history in the league, it's very hard to skip steps in the playoffs. There are very few teams that have basically gone from either not being in the playoffs or being, first or second round outs to being a title team. Really the Golden State team from 2015 is the only one in recent memory that kind of qualifies in that sense. And obviously that team had a new coach and a lot of stuff happen all at once to kind of allow it to jump up a few levels. But certainly, Ben and Joel at the positions they're in their career, with the experiences they've gone through, I definitely think they're ready to kind of take on the challenge of going later into the playoffs. Again, I think it's more just a question of whether the team ultimately has that high of a ceiling. And for as well as they've played this year, I think especially with some of the hangups they've had on offense, I think you can look at them and wonder if that's the case. But again, in a wide open Eastern Conference, they have the best record. Joel's been an MVP candidate. I think regardless of the ultimate ceiling, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, especially after the ups and downs of the last couple of years.
You view Ben Simmons specifically to this point this season? Gil and I always go back and forth about his aggressiveness, and I think that, he needs to be a bit more aggressive like we've seen in the month of February. He thinks that maybe because of the way the roster is built, maybe he doesn't have to be, because you have Seth Curry, because you have Danny Green and Tobias playing the way that he is, that you might be able to get away with the lack of scoring based off of the roster. So with that being said, how do you view Ben specifically with the roster now?
Well, I don't think we should expect Ben Simmons to score 42 points every game like he did on Monday. But I'm serious. You shouldn't expect him to score 25, 30, certainly 42 points. But the aggressiveness he played with in that game stood out for a reason, right? And I personally would like him to see him be more aggressive like that more often. The team's obviously going to go through Joel on offense, and he's going to be the guy getting the most shots. And there are some other guys in Seth and Tobias and different guys that can make shots for them. But when Ben Simmons is playing with that level of aggression and with that kind of attacking mentality, the team looks different. And, he is a fascinating player. He might be my favorite player in the league to write about simply because he is such a enigma at times. Because he'll have games where he doesn't seem like he's really having any impact on the game offensively. And then he'll have a game against the best team in the league in Utah on Monday when he has those 42 points and he has 19 points in the first quarter and he's like a runaway freight train. going to the rim that can't be stopped. So I think that ultimately for this team to get where it wants to go with this current iteration, it needs more of that version of Ben on Monday, and they need to figure out a way to get him to play with that kind of mentality when he's out there on the court with Joel Embiid.
Now, Tim, you have covered Ben for a while. Do you have a read on him? Like, what is your take of who he is and what he wants to be as a player? Because I think he's an enigma. People look at what he did. I know he's not going to score 42, but there's a lot of people that say he could score 22 a night if he felt like it. Why doesn't he feel like it? And why doesn't he want to do more? Because it feels like he has the talent to be more, which makes him such a polarizing figure. So how close do you kind of, relate to what he wants to be and kind of the way he views himself?
I thought Tobias Harris had a really interesting answer about this on Monday when he said that Ben basically goes in every game and analyzes what the team needs and does it. And I think that's I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but I think that kind of sums up his approach. He's an incredibly smart basketball player. He is an awesome passer, terrific defensive player. It's kind of the ultimate Swiss Army knife, right? And I do think he tends to look at the game and say, all right, my team needs me to do this, and then goes and does that. And I think on Monday, with Joel Embiid out of the lineup, that was a situation where he could go out there and be aggressive in attack because his team needed him to try to score 40 points to probably win that game, right? And I think because that's not his first instinct, he is a pass-first guy. He is a get everybody else involved guy before he's going to be a guy that's going to go out and try to score 40. I do think if he could have more of that aggressiveness on a regular basis, things would look a lot different. But again, that's what makes him so interesting, is that there aren't a lot of guys that you talk about like this in the league. And, he certainly, for me, is at the head of the class in terms of guys that you watch him. And like you said, from game to game, you're trying to figure out what they're going to do, and you're just not quite sure what it's going to look like.
Knowing how bad the roster construction was last year, what is the fair expectation for Daryl Morey this season? I think because the team came out so hot, expectations were very high. Now you're starting to see more flaws with this team. And I just think when you saw how disastrous it was, to imagine someone stepping in, snapping their fingers, and it all be fixed within one offseason, it's just not fair. So what do you think a fair expectation for Morey is this season?
I mean, look, I think the Sixers certainly made some good moves in the offseason to remake the roster and get it more aligned with optimizing Ben and Joel. I think that was step one, right? Step two is now, I think, to try to add another piece or two to get this team over the top. And like with this current group, I look at the Danny Green spot. I just don't think that spot is good enough, particularly offensively, for this team to be a championship level team right now. I could end up being wrong about that. Maybe Joel will be the best player in the league in the playoffs and they will power their way through, but they feel like they're a little bit short. And I think whether it's between now and the trade deadline or in the off season or beyond, I think the Sixers need to get one more piece to upgrade the offensive side of things, because the defense is really good, right? I mean, they're third or fourth in the league. Joel's one of the most impactful defenders in the league. Ben is one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. They've got a chance to guard just about anybody on a nightly basis. But you guys have seen it, right? When they struggle, what happens? They're not shooting threes. Their offense gets bogged down. And in a league where everybody can put up 130 a night now on the right night, the Sixers just don't have that kind of offensive upside to me. That to me is really the question. Are they able to swing a piece between now and the deadline that improves that ceiling on offense? It gives them a chance to get to that kind of level. Or if not, are they able to add that piece in the summer? But look, you're not going to fix everything with the team overnight. Starting out with Ben and Joel is a really good place to be. And I think Daryl has done a nice job of reshaping the roster to optimize those guys. And I think, knowing his track record, he's going to be aggressive and going out and trying to find deals that he can find to raise the level of his team and give him a chance to win.
Tim Bontemps, ESPN NBA writer and reporter, is with us. The Sixers Bulls tonight on ESPN television. You obviously have been around this team enough to know that the people who follow this team, the fans, I should say, thought that Brett was a big problem. I don't know how much he factored in to how good they were, how good they weren't. But how much is the coaching change different and make the expectations of this team different, in your opinion?
I always thought Brett Brown got a very raw deal for how things were with the Sixers. I mean, they have had a bizarre team for basically this whole run, right? In terms of difficult to fit together pieces. Like if you were just looking at the top 20 players in the league or top 25 or 30 players in the league, whatever grouping you put Ben and Joel in, they might be the two least compatible players other than just having like a center and two actual centers on the team. They might be the two least compatible players of that group to put together and try to make work. And to try to build out from there, I think has always been a challenge. So, I mean, look, the Sixers won a lot of games with Brett. I thought he did a good job. I didn't think that they lost series or lost games because he was messing up coaching stuff. But look, Doc Rivers is an established championship-level coach. He's had tons of playoff success. He's made the finals multiple times. He's won a title. And I think, I certainly think, I don't think it was Brett's fault. I do think, it didn't hurt to have a new voice with this team. And I am not surprised that Joel in particular is playing the way he is with Doc as his coach, because Doc is the kind of guy that's going to be able to get to Joel and really be able to lift him up. You've seen that in the past with Blake Griffin, with DeAndre Jordan, with the guys he had in Boston, even Tracy McGrady earlier in his career in Orlando. Doc is good at connecting with guys and pumping them up and getting them to believe they're capable of doing as much or more than they have in the past. And, I think as a result, Joel's playing great. The Sixers look really good. And again, we'll see how things shake out from here. But there's, for a fan base that tends to be looking for the football to be pulled away at the last second, I do think that there's a lot to be optimistic about with the way things are going right now, regardless of what the ultimate ceiling of this immediate group is.
All right, Tim. So you've seen, most of the East up close. The Nets, the Bucks, who have really struggled. Philly's in there. Boston's had their ups, but downs recently here. Obviously, Toronto/Tampa has played a lot better in recent weeks here. Kind of handicap what you've seen from the East, from the first quarter of the season here.
This is not a good answer as someone who's supposed to know what's happening in the East, but I have no idea what to make of the East. You look at all these teams are good and they all have obvious flaws. And it makes it really hard to peg who is, to say right now definitively who is the best team in the East. I have no idea. The Nets don't guard anybody. The Sixers at times, like I said earlier, get really bogged down offensively. I'm not sure they can shoot well enough from the perimeter to win. And obviously we don't know what they're going to look like in the final minutes of a playoff game. That was the thing Jimmy Butler was supposed to fix, and they haven't really fixed it since he left. Milwaukee has been a disaster lately. They only really have 4 or 5 good players. The Celtics have no depth either. The Raptors don't have any centers. The Pacers are a very solid team, but they don't have the same kind of ceiling. The Heat have not replaced Jay Crowder, and they're getting beat left and right by teams lately. I think all these teams are pretty good, and I think they're pretty interesting. And I also think that between now and the deadline, if any one of them can make a significant move, I think it could allow them to become at least in my mind, a clear favorite. Because right now, I sort of think it's going to come down to who plays who in the playoffs and how matchups go and how injuries are. Because I don't feel very comfortable at all saying I definitely feel good that this is the best team in the East. You kind of throw them all in a pot, and 1 week you might think it's one team, and another week you might think it's another team, and another week you might think it's another team, because these flaws that they all have all just stand out and make it difficult from game to game to know how these teams are going to play, and from month to month or beyond, who is going to be the team that's going to be standing at the end of the playoffs and the finals against whoever comes out of the West.
All right, well, it continues tonight. Sixers Bulls on ESPN TV. Coverage starts at 7. Ryan Ruocco will be on the call with Richard Jefferson. You can hear the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. Our coverage starts at 7:30 with Tom McGinnis. He's Tim Bontemps, covers the league and a lot of the East here, so great insight on the Sixers. And I kind of agree. I think this East is so wide open, so up in the air. Who makes that big move could be the difference in the East. Tim, we appreciate it, man.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, Tim Bontemps, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.